Last week we did Romans chapter 6, verses 1 to 10. We tried to do 1 to 14, but we couldn't. Just a recap from Romans 6, 1 to 10. Remember, even further, remember, Paul, this is a new section in Romans, and chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is about identity. Okay, so essentially, remember, chapter 1, Gentiles, under the wrath of God. Chapter 2, Jews, under the wrath of God. Chapter 3, both of you, Jew and Gentile, everyone, past, present, future, under the wrath of God. Chapter 4, therefore we need justification. Okay, works can't do that. You can't work your way. Justification, a legal term that God declares you as righteous in the midst of your brokenness, in your state of your sinful nature. God needs to declare you righteous through Jesus Christ, and He gives Abraham, He gives David as the illustrations, who Jews revered. And then chapter 5 were implications as far as what it means to be justified. So you have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. You are no longer at war. You are in the throne room of Christ. You have this new hope, and suffering refines this hope, or shows maybe suffering can expose that it's not. So chapter 6, verses 1 to 10, essentially is about identity, which we kind of talked about last week. And remember, there was this comparison between Adam and Christ that he talked about in chapter 5, and very similarly he brings it back in chapter 6 about identity. So remember, you are positionally before God perfect. Okay, positionally, because when God sees you, He sees Christ, and we talked about the word imputation, and it's also a legal term. It's within the definition of justification. Imputation is pretty much the concept of the Yom Kippur, or Leviticus chapter 16, where the high priest would take the goat, and they would take the sins of Israel for the whole year and put it upon the goat, and then they would sacrifice one goat, and they do the exact same thing another, representing the sins of Israel throughout the year, and it'd be sent down to the wilderness, most likely to be slaughtered by other animals. Okay. Very similarly, when it came to Christ on the cross, when Christ was on the cross, screaming, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Remember, that is the essence of hell. Okay, the essence of hell is separation with God experientially, personally. We are experiential creatures, body and soul, and our souls are made to be united with God. That was the very essence of it. But because of the fall, there's now a separation. Okay, so when we think of hell, remember, for more of a Western, I'll say post-Enlightenment thinking or Renaissance thinking, is hell is fire and brimstone, lake of fire. We've talked about this. Remember, it's not just the ontology as far as like how it looks like, but the psychology. We're psychological beings. So when Christ was on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was an experience of hell that He experienced. Okay? But for that experience is what happened was that our sins, past sins of the entire world were upon Him on that moment, where God looked upon Him. And when He looked upon Him, he couldn't, right? For that split second. And what happened was that when Christ was on the cross, His righteousness was spread upon people past, present, future. So His righteousness applied to Abraham, thousands of years before his own existence, to Moses, to people that believed, to David. Let's take Hebrews chapter 11, Hall of Faith, right? Not just people in past tense, but also people future tense. Me, you, everyone that's existed, that's believed for the last 2,000 years, and not just 2,000 years. Let's just say, for argument's sake, we exist for another 1,000 years. It's kind of hard to believe, right? Just looking at the news that humanity will be alive for another 1,000 years. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that it is. His justification, his righteousness will be applied to people 1,000 years after that belief. Okay, so if you see a newborn baby and that newborn baby becomes a believer, the righteousness of Christ 2,000 years ago is applied to the baby in the present moment. Okay, that's imputation. Therefore, when God looks upon the baby, it is therefore righteous. Not the baby's righteousness based upon works, but based upon the work of Christ, the perfection of Christ. Okay, so identity. Remember, Paul says in verse 2, where he says, verse 3, do you not know? Verse 6, we know. Verse 9, we know. So he is to his audience, the Jews and the Jews and the Gentiles. He's saying, I want you to know your identity. Okay. Now, from verse 11, to 14, could I have someone read that out loud? Romans chapter 6, verses 11 to 14.
So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body to make you obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under the law, but under grace.
Okay. So, verse 11, so you also must consider yourself what? Dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Okay, so that is an indicative, meaning it's a fact, that we are dead to sin and alive to God. And then from verse 12 to 13, that's an imperative, meaning it's a command. Let not your sin therefore reign in your mortal body. So because the indicative in verse 11, meaning that it's the fact, and then also the imperative, the command from verse 12 to 13, what Paul is saying is becoming, that's practice, who you have become positionally. Okay, so becoming who you've become. In other words, become practically who you are positionally before Christ. Meaning, because I stand perfect before God, the process of sanctification is practically working that out as far as my daily conduct into how I stand before Christ. Okay, a lot easier said than done, but it's possible. Okay, it is possible. The process of sanctification, that is you becoming Christ-like, or your position before God, is possible. The old bleeds out in the new. This happens in life, meaning we say we're something, right? I'm a Christian, or I'm perfectly righteous before God, but the old bleeds out. Okay, you ever see the film Aladdin, where Aladdin was trying to be what's his name, Prince Ali Baba? He's acting like he was a prince right before the Sultan. He's trying to impress the daughter or whatever it is, but the hoodlum street rat comes out. It leaks, right? So he's saying, I'm a prince. This is who I am, but his old self, I think he had his monkey Abu, right? Maybe who he was, who he really is. It leaked out. You know what I mean? Like his mannerisms, his slang, the way he'll be all like, not as proper as he would say. Very similarly, our old self leaks out. Okay, but what Paul is saying as far as we need to match our position or our practice with how we are positionally before God. Okay, verse 12 to 13. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal bodies to make you obey to its passions. Do not present your members to sins as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourself to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. Living in alignment with our bodily reality. Okay, living in reality. So the first, we're talking about living in our alignment with our new identity. That's positionally perfect before God. Here in verse 12 to 13, he's talking about living in alignment with our bodily reality. Okay, so look at verse 12. Do not let Do not let sin therefore reign in your mortal bodies, okay? But to make you obey to its passions, okay? So remember this, in our bodies, okay, the new state. We'll get into this later on in verse 15 and onward. But in our new state, how we are before God, you are a new creation, okay? Now what happens in this process is you have a new desire now. You have a new desire to serve God, okay? So in our bodies, within us, we have the illustration people have is two dogs. You have the dog of the flesh that's hungry, but you have a dog of the spirit that's also hungry. And whatever you feed grows, okay? Whatever you feed grows. The dog of the flesh and that of the spirit. Can someone read Galatians 5:17-21 out loud? Galatians 5:17-21 out loud.
You
17-21.
For the flesh desires what is contrary to the spirit, and the spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, and the debauchery, idolatry, and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God.
So essentially, as far as which is fed, the spirit or the flesh, that is, who's responsible for that? You are. Okay, so we'll get into human nature or the development of a person, but essentially you are responsible for that. Okay, and it is possible that you starve that of the flesh. You have a desire, you have a natural desire to do things that are more inclined with yourself, your pride, your ego. Okay, but if you starve that, essentially that is what it means to be putting the flesh, your desires, to death. Okay, so starvation brings death to these desires. Feeding these desires makes it grow. So if you feed the fleshly desires, guess what? It grows. And this is what happens. We have this concept called addiction. Okay, so remember, the word addiction is not in the Bible. Okay, I know John MacArthur got in a lot of trouble the last 2 weeks. He had a sermon called "Mental Health Does Not Exist." Not the best title to exactly not the best title to have, but essentially what he was saying was that biblical emotions, but bad emotions, are relabeled in the 21st century, which is true, right? Like ADHD, autism, like everyone's diagnosed. If you notice it, right? The APA, they diagnose almost everyone with like, oh, this child has autism, this child has ADHD. When it's like nowadays, everyone has ADHD with the phone, right? All the screen time and the people's attention spans are going down, right? So essentially, the word addiction just means that this desire that you have fed is almost at the point of it's uncontrollable. Something outside of me has mastered me. Okay, I follow it. I don't command it; it commands me. You see. So when people go to AA, NA, the implication is I'm in bondage, and these things are my master, and I have no control over it. If I did, then I wouldn't be here. If I did, then I wouldn't be in this position. But it's a reality. Okay, the Bible doesn't say addiction, but it talks about idolatry. It talks about feeding the flesh to the point I have no control. And guess what happens when your fleshly desires, you have no control over them? Addiction. Okay, remember, what you feed grows. Okay, what you feed grows. Now he talks about in verse 13, but present your members to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God of instruments for righteousness, speaking about the mortal body. Now, The body, the human body, it was initially created as instruments of righteousness. The body. Okay, remember, you are soul. That's the very essence of who you are. But you're also a body too. Okay, so remember, you will have resurrected bodies, and you're always going to have your body. But the thing is this: your body was naturally made for righteousness. The human body implies I am not in control. Okay, the human body implies order. The reason why I say I'm not in control, remember I told you guys last week, I saw Peter Pan when I was a kid, Hook, the film Hook. I envied those kids, right? The Lost Boys, and I was like, I want to fly too, right? But I can't. You know why? Because I have a human body, and the human body is limited. Okay, there's limitations to it, especially after the fall. We have something called death. We have something called aging. We have something called diseases that happen to us. It implies we are not in control. Okay? Does anyone want to? Who wants to go to Hawaii? We all want to go to Hawaii here. Can we all teleport there? Can't. I can't do that. Maybe in the film, maybe in movies, maybe in some AI, CGI, or Marvel or whatever it is.
Hey, I'll get you guys some tickets.
The
issue is the food and the housing. That's the hard
part. Right. You're Alaska Airlines, Peter. I appreciate that. But it implies limitations, right? The body, okay, it implies limitations, but there's an alignment that the body has. Remember, think of it. Think of a lot of the debate we see today as far as sexuality, abortion, marriage. These things are debates as far as the human body and alignment. Okay, so we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. That is alignment within the order of God. Okay, we believe in procreation. That is within the alignment of God. Remember, the physical body. Okay, so think of order in the world. There's internal order as far as the human soul. This is what St. Augustine spoke about as far as the ordering of loves or desires within us. And then after that, there's how the body conducts itself in society. And there's also an order to it, right? Man was created to have a father. Man was created to have a mother. These are orderly fashions. Once we go away from a specific order, there's a disalignment with God or a disalignment with the universe, and as a result, there's a harm to it. Okay? It wasn't meant to be out of order, but this is what the fall did. So, with a regenerated heart, the body aligns itself within the reality of God. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Abolition of Man, calls it the Tao. Okay, T-A-O, meaning that there's an order in the universe that man is to conduct, to set himself in. Watch. If we don't work, we'll become purposeless inside and therefore be a victim to depression. Happens to everyone, right? There's something inside of you that who created that? That's the alignment that God has for the world, right? Community. There is something where it's not good for man to be alone. If you're disconnected from people, you experience an emotion of loneliness. You're out of order. So therefore we need to be in community. That's order. You see that? There's a set order as far as the human body goes. Okay? Verse 14, for sin will have no dominion over you since you are not under law but under grace. And here we talked about, last week we talked about the origins of death. Remember, law leads to sin, which leads to death. Grace leads to righteousness, which leads to life. Okay, it's in a reiteration of chapter 5, verse 20 to 21. But here it talks about the very origins of death, which we define death as the physical, separation between body and soul, spiritual, our souls are separated with God, and eternal, our souls are eternally separated from God. Okay? Any questions? Kevin?
So it's law leads to sin, and then sin leads to death.
Yes.
And then grace
leads to righteousness, which leads to life. Yeah, so remember the law, people presume this, Jews presume this, even Christians presume this, is the law. Remember, the law is made for exposure. That's it. That's all the law does. We don't need the law as far as to know that murder is wrong. We know it's wrong, right? Even the first parts of even the book of Genesis, where murder wasn't commanded, we really knew was wrong. It's within it's innate. Okay. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah.
All right. Any questions? No? All right. We're going to go to 15 to 23 of Romans. Can someone read that out loud? Or how about, can someone read that out loud, 15 to 23?
What then?
Yeah, I'm gonna find my glasses.
Oh, Bonnie was going to read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Peter, do you want to read it? Or Bonnie?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, hold on a second.
All right.
Drop my Bible here. Romans 6, 15 to 23. What then shall we sin? Because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid. Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves as servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. But God be thanked that ye were the servants of sin. But ye have obeyed from the heart that from of doctrine which was delivered unto you. Being then made free from sin, ye became the servants of righteousness. I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. Whereas ye have yielded your members servants to uncleanness, and to iniquity unto iniquity. Even now yield your members servants to righteousness unto holiness. For when ye were the servants of sin, ye were free from righteousness. What fruit had ye then in those things whereof ye are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now being made free from sin, and become servants to God, ye have your fruit unto holiness, and the end of everlasting life. And the end everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord.
All right. Slaves. Paul uses the illustration at the beginning of chapter 6 he uses the illustration of baptism, and then he uses the illustration of crucifixion, and now he uses the illustration of slavery. So for us, remember, slavery, I hate to say this, but like in 2020, where we had all the Black Lives Matter, and we were ironically quarantined, so we had to look at our phones and the computer. We somehow just have to, we were told America was racist and had all this horrible, and the implication was to do your research. You Americans, do your research as far as what happened in the past. And guess what happened? A lot of Americans, they did their research. And not only did they do American research as far as slavery, but they did global research. And the general consensus was, wow, other people have had it worse. I'm just being honest. Like, this was meaning, and when I say that, what I mean was slavery has existed for thousands of years. Still exists today, right? It's not an American thing that only blacks were enslaved. It was from the time of the Israelites and Moses, and it didn't stop. It continued, right? The Jews were still enslaved. Remember, we went to the book of Daniel. They were still, Daniel was a slave. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they were eunuchs. They were slaves, right? To the time of Christ, there was slavery. To the time of the Roman Empire, who he's talking about here, half the nation or half of the Roman Empire was built upon slaves, right? On and on, slavery existed until a guy by the name of William Wilberforce in the UK, who was an evangelical, stepped up, right? So slavery it has always existed, okay? But the slavery here that Paul is in reference to is internal, okay? It's internal slavery. So To be a slave back in the ancient world, or was either it was your choice. You chose to be a slave, or you were forced to be a slave. It was your choice, or it wasn't your choice. So if there was a war, and one nation defeated another nation, the nation that won would look upon those who were left over, say women and children, and they would either kill them or they would enslave them. And chances were people would want to be slaves than be dead. Okay, this is just the reality of the way humans lived back in the day. If you were a gladiator, you know what gladiator meant? It meant you were a slave. Okay, Luke, the guy who wrote the Gospel of Luke, was a doctor, but he was a doctor and he was a slave. He was a slave doctor. So people had multiple trades. Okay, they were slaves. But remember, we talked about Onesimus in the book of Philemon. As far as the way slavery was, it was your choice, but it wasn't your choice. Okay, so let's go deeper. Is that slavery isn't external, but the slavery that Paul is talking about here is internal. Okay, we are all, every single one of us, are not free people. Okay, we are not free people, past, present, future. The only free people were Adam and Eve. Okay, we're going to get to this in a bit, and it's going to be fun. We're going to talk about a guy by the name of Simeon the Stylite. Okay, has anyone heard Simeon the Stylite? No? All right, it's going to be fun. Guys online, we're under a minute. Let's all exit off, and then we'll come right back on. Okay? Simeon, the Stylite. Okay, so no one's heard of Simeon the Stylite. He was born in 390, so he was a 4th, 5th century monk. Okay, in Turkey, and Simeon the Stylite. It's very similar. Like I'm going to bring this into Romans chapter 6. But I'll send you photos of him because it's pretty like, I can't believe this is a true story. But oh, sorry, Elaine. I gotta bring my Christmas lights just for you. Okay, there you go. Simeon the Stylite. So Stylite was a pillar. Okay, in Latin, that's what it means, Stylite. So he was born in 390, and what happened was that when he was 13, he read the Gospel of Matthew, the Beatitudes in chapter 5, and he was overwhelmed with the teachings of Christ. And he decided that he wanted to put his fleshly desires to death. So back in the ancient world was that, in the antiquity, was that if you wanted to put your flesh to death and you meant it, you joined the monastery, the monastic movement. The monastic movements were single. They were all about crucifying these desires. Okay, so he joined the monastic movement, Simeon, and he was a little too much for the monastics. To be a monastic was a little too much. Like what was considered your radical, right? It was like pretty much you're a nun, or you're a monk. That's what it literally meant. But even within the monastery, within the monastics, he was a little too extreme for them. So he would only eat on Sundays. Simeon. He would only eat on Sundays. He would fast from Monday to Saturday. When it came to women, when it came to like physical things, he was against. Okay, so he was so extreme that the monastics, the monastery, kicked him out. So what Simeon did was that he went by himself because he believed that this world was evil, everything was just bad for him. That he went into a cabin by himself in the wilderness, and he lived there for 1.5 years by himself. And he would stand up as long as possible, just to pray. And after he's like, I could do this for 1.5 years. So after the year and after he was in this this cabin, he went to the wilderness, even further away from society. And people were marveled by Simeon, that they followed him, they gathered around him, and it kind of reminds me of Forrest Gump. Remember where he was running? he just kept running and running and running and running, and people just started to follow him. Or it's like, leave me alone. Like, it's very similar. People started to follow him because they were enamored by this guy's dedication, because he's in the wilderness by himself, right? So what he did, because people followed him, he wanted to avoid people, physical contact with people. This is like, they call him the social distancing saint, because this is the story of him. What he did, because people followed him, he lived on top of a 9-foot pillar by himself. So, there are pillars back. There you go. She has a picture, right? So, if you want to screenshot that and send it to the group. So he lived on a 9-foot pillar, and then after the night, because people still followed him, he was on the 9-foot pillar, but he's kind of looking down. 9 feet is good enough to look down and have a conversation, but you can still see that he had to go on a bigger pillar, and the bigger pillar was 60 feet tall.
Oh my goodness.
So he lived, I'm not even joking, on top of this pillar for 37 years, and he never set foot on ground.
How did he eat?
I think Danny,
Hey,
Don
I'll
Vito.
get you in a minute, man. I'm just adjusting to my laptop.
I got you. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to be seen.
The Don. We're talking about Romans 6, Danny. So he lived on top of this pillar for 37 years, and what happened was that 3 Roman emperors, because they were so enamored by him, came to see him. So I think the same thing. I know when it came to food, people fed him. So he was like an attraction. He was literally like people swarmed him. Like he was like a tourist attraction, to the point where he was on top of this 60-foot pillar. He couldn't lie down. He had poles around it. He was able to have poles around it, but what he would do was he would bow down, like worshiping to God, to the point, his flexibility. That's all he did. That's all he did, to the point where his head was able to bow down, almost touch his feet, right? And someone counted that he would bow down 1,244 times a day, right? Just bowing down, right? In his prayer, but he'd be fed by people would bring him food through a ladder. But I wonder, how did he use a restroom?
I was thinking that too.
You know what I mean? Like, how do you brush your teeth? And mind you, he endured the sun, the scorching heat. This is in Turkey. He endured the cold. So, and then what he did was he was bowed down and he didn't move. And then someone came up and he was dead after 37. So he died at 69 years old. Okay, so and then this kind of was it kind of was a thing. I think there was Simeon the Younger, who was also a style, who did the exact same thing. I don't know if it was 37 years, but this was one saint, as far as this is Simeon the Stylite. Okay, so 37 years on top of this pillar lived. That's like, I'm thinking that's pretty much my entire existence.
Do you think he came down at night?
No, I don't, because what happened was that people swarmed him, so they had to build a fence around him so people couldn't come to, and women weren't allowed to come into that fence. Because remember he did not want to see women because he thought women will tempt him and all that. But even his own mother, he never allowed in until she died. Yeah.
Wow.
And he said when it came to his mother that God willing, one day I will see her in the afterlife. Yeah, and then he saw his mom when she died. They brought her dead body to him while he was on.
Because how did he sleep up there? If he slept sitting up, he'd fall over.
I wonder the exact same thing as far as how to sleep, because like it's hard to sleep just sitting down, but for 37 years.
But even if you did, you'd fall down because your body would just,
Yeah, but he had a cage around him. He had a fence.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Speaking of, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, Peter.
Speaking of asceticism, when people are in a discussion in different faith groups within Christianity, and they mention the quote unquote desert fathers, what is your posture about that?
So here's my thing with Simeon the Stylite. Like I think he's too extreme. If I like I get a lot of people, okay, and more my conversation is more with men, is that they get to a point of their desires are too strong, say for women, say for sexuality, or say for that they want to just live in a desert by themselves and never experience. So it's really a physical means to escape temptation, right? But remember, your nature always follows you, and this is Paul's point here. It's not an external thing; it's an internal thing.
Yeah.
You see, so I think I never even said the word, but you did, Peter. But I think you hit it on the nail. Is I think Simeon the Stylite, I think he's falling into the category of asceticism. So asceticism is mentioned in Colossians chapter 2, and asceticism is you physically suffer for the sake of getting righteousness of Christ. So people question Simeon the Stylite as far as, is he trying to gain attention? Because he was a tourist attraction. People would just come to the desert and look at him like, wow, there he is. Wow. And so what happened was that they had a discussion as the monastics, even the Roman emperor, and they asked him to come down. And they said, if he doesn't come down, he's doing this for attention. But he came down. He was willing to live amongst the people. And once he came down, he never set his foot on the floor. But once they saw he was willing to do so, they said, he's being genuine, right? But regardless, Peter, is that necessary? I think we can go to extremes as far as killing the flesh inside of us, killing the pride, or avoiding temptation. But as far as a witness goes, as far as, did Simeon go to Japan and preach the gospel? Well, you can't, because you're living on top of a pillar, right? So I would say that Simeon does fall into the category of asceticism. Like it's not biblical, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Like, so let's maximize his principle. Let's say everyone did the exact same thing. Well, the gospel wouldn't spread, right? Because the end goal would be we're avoiding temptation as much as possible, right? And the essence of Christianity, as far as temptation goes, isn't to avoid it more externally, even though there's wisdom in it, but it's more to kill it in the heart. And that's exactly what Paul's point here is in Romans chapter 6.
Right.
And remember, he's not the only one. The monastics, like, they would whip themselves in the back. They would sleep intentionally on on hardwood floor, not because they didn't have a bed. It's just because they just wanted to suffer.
Or a bed of nails.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that some people slept on a bed of nails or spikes, just to experience potential righteousness.
Well, like in the Philippines, they still do real crucifixions or
Yeah,
something
that was at the tip of my tongue. It's about to come out. I was going to say in the Philippines, the Iglesia ni Cristo, meaning the Church of Christ, they believe that. Like, you ever see clips of people in the Philippines, they're literally being they don't die, but they're literally being crucified, like the nails on their hands, and they're like on the cross. And to them, they're gaining righteousness of God. And you know what it is, essentially? At the very heart of that, it is self-righteousness. It's these people are living so comfortable. Look at them. Easy people. Look at me being crucified. Or look at me. I'm on top of a pillar suffering. How come you're not? Remember, we don't run to suffering. We run to Christ, and suffering follows us. Right? That's the essence of persecution in Timothy. Yeah, so I would say Simeon the Stylite falls into that category of asceticism. Like, I think it was too extreme. Like eating on Sundays and then not fasting from Monday to Saturday. Right? That's unhealthy. Right? So so in Ethiopia there are guards. They believe that the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. It's a group that they think the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia, and the guards, they have AK-47s. They do the exact same thing. They eat on Saturdays and Sundays, and they fast from Monday to Friday, and they're insanely skinny. Yeah, Bonnie was there, and she showed me pictures of it. But
really, wow.
They believe that the guards, like, if you want guards, you want like muscular.
Yeah.
I have no clue why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
AK-47s. So, I think it is a form of self-righteousness. Is that when you're suffering and no one, like, you look down upon people because they live comfortable lives, and it's like, look at those people. They don't know what it's like to experience suffering. Again, if suffering happens your way, that's one thing. You deal with it. But to run to
Right.
it, to run to suffering, we're not called to do that. Right?
Right.
So suffering hit Job. Job didn't run to suffering. Right?
Well, I kind of wonder if that's what God's saying. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And maybe I don't want to put any thoughts in that. Maybe it's specific to what he's saying, but like you're not going to do it right. Like your sacrifice is probably not going to be as impressive as you may think it is. I kind of wonder if that's maybe the other side of that coin. I don't know.
Yeah.
When you take the temptation away, then you're not really dealing with the temptation. When you take, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you take the temptation away and you stay in your house and you don't have the temptation, but you're not really dealing with it.
And that's exactly what Paul is.
Yeah.
That's why I brought up Simeon the Stylite, to show the extreme version of, let me kill temptation. So I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to lock myself in the room, and I'm going to disengage from everyone. I don't think that's how you do with it. That's because you could have your pride. You could, sad. You can do all that in the name of pride, and not even know it.
Excuse me, can I say something?
Yeah, Danny.
Yeah. Being all by yourself and doing all that stuff gives no glory to God. The attention goes to you. You're not a servant of your brother. You're not bearing his burdens.
Yep.
You're not loving. You're not having koinonia.
Yep.
If you're tempted by women, of course you deal with that. You don't stay in the same room with a woman, and there's other things that you can do to deal with it. But not having the koinonia and not glorifying God by being some kind of freak, man. You know what I mean? I'm here late. I don't know what it's a reference to, but it makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. No, I 100%, Danny. Like it's in it. I think someone like that, like they just don't understand the human heart. Like when you get it, you don't do things like that, right? I think it's oh no, I froze.
Saying, yes, I am a believer. Yes, I am. And if you die that way, of course, but suffering for the sake of suffering is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Stating the fact that you're saved by grace through Jesus Christ and you die through that. I'm going to a church of Grace up here, and they go to Pakistan. They have houses. They bought acres for these people that are literally slaves making bricks. And if they have a baby and they're slaves, then their child has to be a slave. Make a long story short, they got about 250 people in this church, and they started to sing and praising God, and some of the Muslims heard it, and then they bared false witness against the guy and said that he raped one of their kids because they didn't like people being won to Christ. He had to get out of there because they were going to kill him. Now, that's another way of suffering for Christ, giving up your life. And he knew that he may die sharing the gospel with these Muslims. So I think that's what suffering is for God's glory, not cutting yourself. That's psychologically, mentally ill.
Yeah, there's a practice in Hinduism where they cut themselves. There's a practice in Shia Islam where they literally cut themselves on their forehead and the blood drips all over them, so it looks more extreme. But again, these are religious practices that people do that they think they're getting favor with God. It can happen in Christianity too. People that believe the Bible, but they'll just add it on to it. Right? And Paul, again, he specifically addresses in Colossians and uses the word asceticism. So, yeah, it's a thing. Like priests whip themselves in the back. And, I think it's the justification even looking poorly in public, right? I think some of the monks, remember they used to cut their hair like Martin Luther did. Right? The opposite of the balding here. It'd be you just have it here, but you cut. But it's do you guys think that's attractive? If a guy were to wear that, is that as women? No, it's not, right? That's my point. Don't do it, right? But that's the point. But people have that concept. They have that in mind. Like look skinny, look frail, right? And remember, Jesus, where he calls the Jews out, where he says, when you guys fast, you intentionally do it because you want to look all tired. And oh, look at me, I'm fasting for 3 months. Right? But he's like, no, you're doing that to be seen because you look righteous when you do that.
Attention.
Yeah, attention. So Simeon the Stylite, that's exactly what people were saying. Like, is he doing it for attention? 37 years. Right? So, anyways, my point of bringing Simeon the Stylite into this discussion is that in Romans 6, 15 to 23, Paul, do you think Paul wanted to kill his own sin just like Simeon the Stylite? I'm sure he did.
What?
Do you think the Apostle Paul wanted to kill his own flesh? Because Simeon the Stylite, he wanted to kill his own temptation. But I'm sure Paul, Jesus, the apostles, St. Augustine, all wanted to kill their flesh too. But they didn't they didn't stand on a pillar for 37 years, right? Because there's a means of doing it. Right, Bonnie?
It just seems that Simon exchanged his addiction. He has an addiction problem. He went from one addiction to the other. You know, and stayed with the other.
Yeah.
Which really did him no good whatsoever.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there is something inside of us that is what we call the human pride, human ego, and this is where temptation comes about. Okay, look at verse 16, verse 15, 16. What then? Are we to sin because we are not under law but under grace? By no means. And you look at verse 16. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you will obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or obedience, which leads to righteousness? Okay? You know what Paul is saying here? We're all slaves.
Yeah.
All of us. All of us are slaves to something or someone. Every single one of us. There are external slaves or outward slaves, but there is internal slaves. Remember, we don't deal with external slaves. And what I mean by the external slaves is I have no physical master with a whip or expecting, you know what I mean? But what, and especially as people who live in the West or here in America, is that what a desire or a notion that the people prize themselves of here? Independence. Independence. I am free. Liberty. Right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? But remember this. To every American, you are not free. And what I mean by you are not free is if you don't have a slave outside, there's slavery inside. And this is the essence of what Paul's point is here. Okay, internal slavery means my choices, my decisions, your decisions in life are based upon, are contingent upon your nature. Your nature. And Paul breaks it down in a dichotomy of two. Okay, either you're a slave to God or you're a slave to your own desires, your sinful desires. Remember, Simeon the Stylite wanted to kill his own slavery to his sinful desires, and his means was, I'm going to go up and live on a pillar. Okay? That doesn't mean it doesn't mean the desires inside of us vanishes away. It could still be alive and well. And the point of it is to kill it within so you don't have to deal with it outside. That's the very essence of it. Okay? So, the only true people that have ever existed, when I say free will, I mean libertarian free will, meaning you have the ability to choose whatever you want, and scholars would agree on this point, is the only people that experienced in this world real free will was Adam and Eve. That's it. After the fall, there was a bounding that we had as far as our choices, our desires, and that was we had a sinful nature. So our nature now is inclined to ourselves. Okay? If my nature is inclined to myself, guess what? I have a hard time serving other people in our organic fashion. I have a hard time looking at God and bending the knee to God. Right? You know, Satan and demons, they believe Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead. They believe the gospel. The only difference between demons, the reason why demons are doing what they're doing isn't a mental state as far as Jesus resurrected from the dead. It's a heart issue. There's no submission. Okay? as far as humans go, we all have the exact same desire as far as we have a hard time submitting to God. We can't because we're inclined to ourselves. Okay, and what Paul says is this regeneration process, when you are justified, you become a new creature, a creation, to the point that this guy is now dead. Positionally, you are now right with God. To now you have the freedom to serve. You have the freedom to serve God. Okay, so remember, nature. None of us are free, and the reason why I say no one is free is because we're bound to our nature. Okay, when you die to the flesh, you become alive to God. You have guess what? You still are you're still a slave, and guess who you're a slave to? God. Okay, remember, this nature, it coincides with our talk on the afterlife. Okay, and the reason why is this: in the afterlife, we will have the new nature permanently. So as a result, we will always be choosing God. We will always be choosing Christ. Okay, if we say there is libertarian free will, when I say libertarian free will, I mean you can choose anything you want. You can choose God or no God. Okay, then we have to leave room for the possibility of a fall in the afterlife. But we don't want to believe that, do we? Right? What I mean by that, the reason why in the afterlife, the new creation, no one will fall is because we will all have a renewed nature permanently. So as a result, we'll always be choosing God. So I always bring up this illustration when it comes to this point, but it's clear. Remember, the tiger, the lion, by nature, they're what? They're carnivores. They by nature eat meat, right? You put the garden salad in front of a tiger, it'll look at it and it'll walk away. It has the ability to eat it, but it won't because it's nature. It eating meat says no to the salad. You see that? Very similarly, our nature is to say no to God and yes to ourselves before regeneration. But when you become a new creation, all of a sudden you have now the ability, just like the tiger, to eat the salad. Okay? So remember, the tiger is bound to its nature. That is, it always eats meat. You put a salad in front of a tiger, 100 out of 100 times it will say no to the salad, yes to the pig. Okay? Rest in right? Ironically, tiger, pig, what was that? Winnie the Pooh? Right? Right? But it will always eat the meat because it's bound by its nature. Very similar, we have a nature too, and we're bound by it. Okay, that's what I'm saying. No one is truly free. It's either you are a slave to sin, nature, or you're a slave to God. But your nature to God is bound by it. Okay? Any questions?
I got a question.
Sure, Danny.
Talking about the people that are cutting themselves and torturing themselves and doing stuff for penance, so to speak, or for their own glory, or whatever. Is that possible to do if you totally understand what the grace of God totally is? Do people misunderstand God's grace when they try to do things like that and suffer on purpose?
No. I think people, grace eliminates that stuff. When you understand the concept of grace, as far as salvation, as far as your conduct in life, there is none of that, I'm going to do more. Grace eliminates this ability to, I need to therefore, right? Grace makes me say, I am now free to obey the commandments of God. I'm now free to obey the commandments of God versus I obey the commandments of God so God can love me. Big difference, right? Grace liberates. It's the very essence of what it does, right? Where he says in verse 14, for sin will have no dominion over you since you are not under the law, but what? Under grace, right? So, yeah, if you understand the concept of the resurrection of Christ and that being by grace alone, even salvation, there is none of this, I'm going to do for whatever outcome. Yeah. So, and you know, it's leaked. I'm being honest as far as your generation, Danny. I think the fundamentalist movement, they miss this part of grace. And there's this concept of, yes, you're saved by grace. They'll say that, but you don't see it acted out. you see read your Bible. Well, do I read my Bible because I'm saved, or do I read my Bible to attain more grace? A lot of times it's communicated, read your Bible because you need to attain grace.
Oh, you froze again. You froze for about 5 seconds, 6 seconds.
Oh, okay. Am I back now?
Oh, okay.
Am I back?
Your internet connection is unstable.
Got
I
it.
don't know if it's mine or yours.
No, I think it might be ours here at the church. But does that make sense, Danny? Like, in when I say, like, the fundamentalist movement, like, read the Bible so you can attain righteousness. Go to church so you can attain righteousness. If you don't go to church, guilt, shame. You know, if you don't go to Wednesday night prayer meeting, guilt, shame. Like, we grew up like this. I don't know if anyone else grew up like this. It was never said, but it was the tone was there, right? But it is awesome where you experience the grace of God and you live it out from that point. Meaning that I will go to prayer meeting because I want to. I have the ability to. I have the ability to fellowship with people. I have the ability to read the Bible. I want, you know what I mean? Versus I have to, right? So grace changes everything.
Amen.
Okay.
No, it still goes on. It's still taught too. Yeah, no, you're exactly correct. No, I am from a Catholic background, and you talk about the legalism, the law in the Catholic Church in the 50s.
Yeah.
You know, when you French kiss a girl, you don't go to a priest to confess it before Sunday. You go straight to hell. It's called
Right.
mortal sin.
Or
And that's what you're talking about is not being able to fulfill the law.
yeah.
Jesus fulfilled the law. We can't do it if we're fundamentalists or Pentecostals. No matter what we do, we have, just like you say, Adam and Eve. You know, after the great fall. So I am in agreement with you whatsoever. A lot of people, I've seen people that I've tried to share Christ with, and the idea of God's grace and forgiveness is something they could not comprehend.
Yeah.
You know, they says, I've done too much stuff. They just never comprehended. And one guy in particular, he died of an overdose of drugs. You know, he just could not understand it. Why could we receive this? Because of Jesus dying on the cross after what I've done. You know, it's such an awesome thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's incomprehensible to a human being that lives in the sense of common sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever.
It's sneaky. Self-righteousness is very sneaky.
It's very, very, very sneaky.
Very sneaky.
In Bible studies, just that self-justifying. You know, it's even in the intent of, bringing a word or something like, intent has an odor to it, as they say.
Yeah.
And I've the older I get, the more I notice it's true. It's you kind of get a flavor of a person, in a sense that, what's the spirit behind the thing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-righteousness.
I could share. I have a Catholic background too, and that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's just that judgmental. Oh my gosh, it's just parochial too. It's not even based on the word.
Yeah. Self-righteousness screams, I'm better than you. So I've read the Bible for 5 hours. You've read it for 4. Not as strong as me, right? It does that, and it's very. And guess what happens? Self-pleasure. I feel good about myself, right? Standards of significance, expressions of superiority, right? Standard of significance, self-righteousness. Therefore, reading the Bible, I'm better than you because I've read it longer than you, right? It's very sneaky, very sneaky. So, yeah. Where are we with time? We're at a minute. Okay, look at the end of...
I can't hear. I gotta get my hearing aids. I don't know if it's the volume here. I'm gonna get my hearing aids.
Okay. Look at, remember I'm saying, we're all a slave to something. No one's free. But remember, if we're all slaves, that implies we only have 2 masters that we can serve in this life. Only 2. Either God or ourselves. Okay, and who said this? You only can serve two masters, right? Or you can't serve two masters. Who said that? Christ, Jesus, Matthew 6:24, right? You cannot, right? You serve either one or the other. Okay. In verse 16, we're slaves to sin or obedience. In verse 17 and 18, we're slaves to Son of Righteousness. And then for verse 20 to 22, slaves to sin or slaves to God. Now, obedience implies freedom from sin as master. Obedience. Okay, remember, when I obey, if I'm obeying, I'm not obeying out of a begrudging heart. Oh, guys online, we're under a minute. Let's exit off and come right back on. Okay, we're under a minute. Let's all press end and come right back on. Okay.
How do you do that? I'm just new on
End meeting, the red button, and then just click start all over again.
leave. It says
Yeah,
leave on.
yeah. Leave the meeting and then start. Oh, just great. Look at verse 17 and 18. Well, I was going to say before was obedience implies freedom from sin as master, meaning a Christian does not obey the Ten Commandments to be saved, but a Christian gets to obeys the Ten Commandments because they're free. They're free. So obedience implies freedom. Okay, if someone can obey, it means their sin is no longer their master. Okay, Jesus says in John chapter 8 verse 34, he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." If you're practicing sin, it means sin's your master. If I'm obedient to God, it implies sin is no longer my master. God is my master. Okay, what we follow, whoever our master is. Okay, so the addict is an addict because whatever that is their master. They always say yes to it. They cannot say no. If not, they wouldn't be in that position. Okay, remember, no one is free. Okay, verse 17 and 18 says, "But thanks be to God that you who are once slaves of sin have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching which you were committed." Verse 18, "And having been set free from sin, having become slaves of righteousness." So here, Paul talks about the origins, meaning that we were born into the slavery of sin, but we were brought into the slavery to God by conversion. So by nature, we were all born slaves to sin. But in order to be a slave of God, I need to be reborn. Okay, so there has to be some sense of a conversion. Verse 19, this is why Jesus says in John chapter 3, you must be born again. Okay, verse 19, because we're almost at 8 o'clock here. "I'm speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations." When he says I'm speaking in human terms, meaning he's using the illustration of slavery to, because people get it. Like, oh yeah, slaves, right? So, for middle of verse 19, "For just as once you presented your members as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness, leading to sanctification." So here, Paul is talking about how this develops, how this nature develops. So slavery to sin is a result of ever increasing wickedness. We're feeding it. Remember, whatever we feed grows. A slavery to God means you're feeding the holiness part. Okay, so it's the evolution of the new man or the evolution of the old man inside, and that's our choice. Okay, so you ever wonder, all of us here, you could see someone and they just are a particular way. Either they're always grumpy, They're always angry. They're always happy. They're always joyful. They're always complaining. Like just the way someone is. You know what I mean? Like there's people don't just become grumpy. Something happens to them to the word they become grumpy all the time. Ebenezer Scrooge was not born like as a baby. Oh, he's going to be a grumpy guy. No, he became Ebenezer Scrooge. Right? You become who you are, but it's a process of nature and nurture. Guess what? All of us have the same nature. Well, we're all different. Well, why? Nurture. We all have different backgrounds, different parents, different upbringings. Certain things were said to you at a young age that gave you life. Certain things that were said to you at a young age gave you death. And now you have to deal with it. Some people, they don't know how to deal with that death part. So they hold on to it. They self-medicate it. They go to certain addictions. But they can't be honest about the pain or whatever it is inside of their heart. And guess what happens? As time goes by, they become a nasty person. Adolf Hitler is not just Adolf Hitler. He became Adolf Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't born Mother Teresa. She dealt with depression for a significant time of her life. But she became Mother Teresa as far as her working with her issues, her bringing it to God. Okay, there's an evolutionary process of these things. Okay, any questions? Any questions? No? Remember, being hurt or having your flesh fed at a young age and not being dealt with, what time will do to your heart, it will cement it. When I mean cement, you just get wet cement and you put it on the ground. Guess what it will take for it to be hardened? Time. Okay? So the person who's, say, 80 years old and they're just a grumpy, nasty, mean-spirited, say Ebenezer Scrooge type person, they have not dealt with that fleshly part of them. Right? They've allowed it to dry up. They've allowed it to persist inside of them. So it's there. It's who is it on? It's on them. Right? They could blame their environment, which a lot of people do. They can blame their parents, what a lot of people do. Right? But all of us have experienced some sense of hardship. Some worse than others. But the point is this. Have you dealt with it? Right? There's certain people who they've been through horrific experiences at a young age. Horrific. Right? But as they get older, they become better people. Why? Because they've dealt with it. They've crucified those fleshly desires and they've fed the godly desires. And there's people who they've had pretty good upbringings, good Christian parents, right? And have had pain, but not as much as the other person that I named before. And guess what? They end up becoming a very wicked, nasty person. Why? Because they never dealt with it. So it's not really their background, it's really on them. You see what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, as far as which dog are we feeding, the flesh or the spirit, that's up to us. Okay? So all of us, every single one of us, has desires that we deal with. Okay? Just like Simeon the Stylite has desires that we deal with. Okay? But we have the choice to put that to death or to feed it. Understand, some of them are hard. Right? But all of us have that ability to do so. And that's the essence of why Christ set us free. So what it looks like, if you are a born-again believer, and say you're caught up in addiction, and it's possible. Okay, it's possible. What it looks like is you're in a prison cell, and the gate is wide open, the shackles are released, the guards are gone, but you're just sitting there, right? That's what it looks like. I mean, you have the ability to do so, right? To crucify these desires. But the reason why these desires are so strong within some people is because they fed it. Remember, whatever you feed grows. Okay? So Simeon the Stylite he decided he's not going to put them to death inside here. He's going to try to put the death of it out there. And it doesn't work that way. Because you can be on top of a 60-foot pillar for 37 years, and guess what? Be struggling with your pride inside. Right? Be struggling with whatever temptations it inside of you. And it's possible. Okay? Any questions? as of
Well,
now?
it's interesting. That he talks about like the fruit that leads to sanctification, and then he uses the fruit metaphor, and then he uses like wages,
Mm-hmm.
and the fruit is more tied to like I guess what I'm saying is like the wages part of sin, like he uses the metaphor for like the wages of a slave versus the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It's more in reference to like righteousness. I don't know. I just found it interesting.
Yeah, the choice of wording, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're at 8:00. Let me end by saying this: everyone looking for freedom or looking for liberty is subconsciously seeking after Christ. Okay, this discussion it needs to be communicated with the world, and what I mean by that is this whole thing of liberty, slavery within the human heart. So think of Christ. Christ was a free man. And what I mean by a free man was internally. Okay, I'm sure he didn't deal with mental health. There was no addiction problems, or because he was a free man inside. And he kind of taught that to his disciples as far as, come to me, all you who are weak, but I will give you rest for your souls. My burden, is light. Okay? Meaning that people are in pursuit of freedom right now. When you see people at an AA meeting or an NA meeting or whatever meeting, they are subconsciously seeking after what? Liberty. When you see people who have mental health problems and they want to take Xanax, they want to take whatever it is, subconsciously, what are they seeking after? Freedom. From all the discussions they're having with inside of themselves. Liberty, when people pursue it, they are subconsciously seeking after Christ. Christ lived a liberated life inside here, and we are not free. What Paul says, we are not free by nature. So we come to Christ, who sets us free. He gives us the ability to do so. He does it positionally, as far as when God looks at us, he looks at you as perfect, as liberated, but we have the practical ability to be free as well by putting these desires to death. But we have to be honest and be vulnerable with ourselves as far as what's inside of the human heart. Okay? Vulnerability, meaning being honest with yourself. When people aren't vulnerable, they lie. Oh, I don't deal with that. Really? Right? When you can be vulnerable, this is where the crucifixion of the personal self comes about. Okay?
Where does like a controlling nature come from? Like,
I think by nature, Kevin, all of us are born with it. I think control is something, and we talked about Mother Teresa and Hitler. I think, for example, someone like Hitler, okay? When I say we're all born with a controlling nature, remember, we all live Genesis 3 out, and that is, you shall be like God. So all of us, God is in genuine control. The thing is with us is we think we're in control. We think we are. You have a baby, and you take one of his toys, or he takes, you know what I mean? Like he'll play with someone else's toy, you take it away from him. The screaming, the crying, who taught that baby did anyone teach the baby how to do that? No, the control came out of the baby, because that's what it does by nature. So the role of a parent, or the role of the very essence of discipline, is to ungod a child, is to make a child know that they're not in control and things don't go their way all the time. Right? When you don't learn that, you grow up and you might be a 60-year-old person, but you have a development inside of you. So you look at someone like Adolf Hitler, he had a control problem, but that was not dealt with at a young age. As a result, it manifested itself into reality. So all of us have that control problem. We're too bashful, we're too ashamed to call ourselves God, right? It's too arrogant, but we act like it. We act like it. We love the praise. We love the honor. We love the control, the power. These things come out of it, come out of us. But putting it to death to the point where we recognize, all honor goes to God. All glory goes to God. All control goes to God. The essence of Go, Peter.
We love the judgment. We love the judgment, being the judge.
Oh yeah, especially when especially when you're more righteous.
There, we're just witnesses. That's our role. Our role in the courtroom is to witness, not to judge.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? We're past 8
That
o'clock.
was really good, but
No
I
questions?
didn't even think of it like that.
Okay. All right.